The year is 1987, and American TV networks launch a number of short-lived shows, such as Starman, Probe, and The Popcorn Kid. In a fit of midlife nostalgia and an effort to remind the internet of shows they have forgotten, lone podcast pilot Chris Cooling steps into the Forgotten TV studio 30 years later. Welcome to Forgotten TV, the podcast that brings you TV memories of the 70s and 80s, from the fondly remembered to the obscure, short-lived TV shows, pilots, and made-for-TV movies. I am your producer and host, Chris Cooling. First, an important comment regarding the state of online content creation that I ask you not to skip. Quite recently, there is a trend developing of deplatforming, defunding, shadow banning, or demonetization of certain content creators by various internet platforms and payment processors, which I fear may only be the beginning of what is yet to come. Now, Forgotten TV is pretty benign and not political or controversial, nor is it a big enough podcast to be on anybody's radar, but it could only be a matter of time before I or any content creator could post a personal viewpoint, or did post something months or years ago that one of these services doesn't like. Or we may like or follow certain individuals and, as a result, be removed from certain platforms or have our funding turned off. This already is happening, and not only to people that may be politically controversial. This is why it is important to follow content creators directly. Forgotten TV content can be found at the website forgotten.tv. You can also find and subscribe to the podcast directly at forgottentv.podbean.com. Until there's a viable alternative, you can support Forgotten TV directly at paypal.me/forgottentv. You can also support the podcast with the use of the Forgotten TV Amazon wish list, like Doc Pinko did with his gift of the Tales of the Gold Monkey DVD. And Richard K. with his gifts of the Logan's Run TV series DVD, and the handy Hangja headphone hangers for the studio. Look for podcasts on these shows in early 2019. All the aforementioned links can be found in the show notes of this episode. Thank you. It has been an object of fascination among Western philosophers and historians for nearly 2,400 years. The ancient Greek philosopher Plato first told the story of Atlantis around 360 BCE in two of his Socratic dialogues. The founders of Atlantis were said to be half god and half human. They created a utopian civilization and became a great naval power. Atlantis was said to be a formation of concentric islands, separated by wide moats, linked by a canal. These lush islands containing gold, silver, and other precious metals, as well as an abundance of exotic wildlife. There was a great capital city on the central island. Once a moral, spiritual people living in an advanced utopia, the story goes that their civilization devolved into one that was greedy and morally bankrupt. As punishment, the gods, in one terrible night of fire and earthquakes, caused Atlantis to sink into the sea. While modern-day academics understand this tale to be an ancient allegory, a commentary on Greek politics and society, Atlantis is a subject that has fascinated and inspired composers of music, artists, as well as fiction writers over the centuries. In the 20th century, the 1921 French-Belgian silent film L'Atlantide featured two French military officers lost in the Sahara Desert, where they discover the legendary kingdom of Atlantis. The film was later remade in the United States in 1949 as Siren of Atlantis. In 1936, Unga Khan sought to conquer Atlantis and the surface world in the Republic Pictures serial Undersea Kingdom with Crash Corrigan. Atlantis has figured in the fictional continuities of both Marvel and DC Comics over the decades. Namor the Submariner, a Marvel character that first appeared in April 1939, was from this sunken continent. Likewise, the DC hero Aquaman came on the scene in 1941 and was also from the Atlantean civilization. The adventurers in the 1959 film Journey to the Center of the Earth find the sunken city of Atlantis, where the bony remains of Arne Saknussemm pointed the way to the surface. In 1961, MGM and George Powell told us the story of Atlantis, the lost continent.
Here, in the middle of our vast ocean, is Atlantis, our mighty empire.
It should come as no surprise that in the 1970s, when interest in all things paranormal and unexplained seemed to be at an all-time high, the ideas instigated by Atlantis once again were presented in popular culture, working its way into the British TV series Doctor Who several times, and by May of 1977, Leonard Nimoy was in search of Atlantis.
The Kingdom of Atlantis. Never before have explorers been so close to finding Atlantis. Never have we possessed as many clues, nor have we been able to bring the detection equipment of modern science to the search. Until now.
It was in this 1970s zeitgeist that a casting company attorney casually mentioned a series idea to TV executive Herbert F. Solow about a man from Atlantis found on the beach. Intrigued, Solow collaborated with friend Mayo Simon and outlined a story idea for a TV movie. Simon then fully fleshed this out into a script, and on March 4th, 1977, NBC aired Man from Atlantis as a 2-hour TV movie. Act 1. A man, his son, and dog are walking the shoreline at night after a violent storm at sea. They find the inert body of a man washed up on shore. At an emergency room, his body seems to be turning blue from lack of oxygen, but normal efforts to oxygenate the man are unsuccessful. He is discovered to have webbed hands and feet. Navy Dr. Elizabeth Merrill and Commander Roth are called for a consultation. After quickly performing a bronchoscopy, Dr. Merrill's face registers disbelief, and she insists on the man being released to her care. Instead of taking him to another medical facility, she has him taken to the nearest shore, and along with Roth and a medic, lower him into the water, where he recovers. Act 2. Later, at the Naval Undersea Center, she is giving a presentation to Admiral Pierce.
After 2 weeks, he was able to leave the pool for short periods, and we began physiological studies. The evidence shows a humanoid being only marginally equipped for life on land. As tests indicate his eyes to be light sensitive, we have prepared a pair of dichroic glasses for him. He tires easily. Any physical exertion will exhaust him. In addition, we find that within 12 hours out of the water, actual physical deterioration begins. The first signs of which are the prominent discoloration of the extremities. Within 16 to 20 hours, if not returned to a water environment, the subject will suffer extensive skin cracking, pulmonary insufficiency, cardiac arrest, and finally death. However...
Doctor, perhaps you could finish off with the technical side of this presentation. The Admiral...
The Admiral's doing just fine, Ainsley. Go on, Doctor, and take your time.
However, in the water, a different picture emerges. He appears to be perfectly adapted to aquatic life, displaying great strength and agility. The chest cavity has gill-like membranes in place of normal lung tissue. Skin appears humanoid, but with dolphin characteristics.
No keratin layer in his skin?
None. Eyes are cat-like in action, able to see at ocean depths in almost total darkness.
Where are you keeping him?
At the moment, he's in the testing lab. He's quite docile and cooperative, and he's becoming as curious about us as we are about him.
While she is giving this presentation, the man has donned clothing and an ID badge and has left the facility to wander nearby streets. We are given fish-out-of-water scenes of him interacting with a Jack-in-the-Box drive-thru and getting trapped in a phone booth. After this wandering, he returns to the center and sits on a bench. Running her data through a Defense Department computer, the response comes back. Last citizen of Atlantis? The Admiral has Mark run through a series of tests, measuring his speed and underwater abilities. They find he is faster than a dolphin and able to withstand depths of underwater pressure to 30,000 feet. Of course, the Admiral's interest in Mark is for national defense. Soon he has a job for Mark, but the assignment doesn't go over too well with Dr. Merrill.
2 weeks ago, we lost the sequest at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. I need your man to find it and help us recover it with the bodies of the crew.
Did you say sequest?
She wasn't told?
With Commander Roth?
Perhaps you'd like to sit down, Doctor.
No, I'm fine. You were saying, Admiral?
It'll be a secret mission with the appropriate cover. Oh, by the way, all information regarding Project Atlantis, including your man's existence, is now classified. It's better for us, safer for him.
What happened to sequest?
Went to lay down a package of seismic probes. Fell off the scope at 36,000 feet. Most advanced technology we own, one of a kind. Now it's lost.
Surely you've tried to locate it?
Sent down a lot of expensive hardware, but we still haven't found it. So we're going to have to use your man to get a handle on it quickly. He'll be under escort and tethered while he's in the water.
I'm sorry, Admiral, but Mark Harris is not a piece of hardware.
That's why I'm asking you to handle him for me.
Admiral, I think it would be best if you made your request to Mark himself.
The Admiral tries to explain the concepts of military and national defense to Mark, who evidently comprehends and begins walking to the shoreline, but quickly fatigues, and he is apprehended. Later, with his tank now guarded by MPs, the order is changed to a request by Dr. Merrill, and Mark agrees, finally speaking his answer.
Yes. I say yes to the Admiral. I say yes.
Act 3. Later, Mark and Dr. Merrill board the Navy ship Elk River under the guise of testing new diving equipment. They learn multiple prior submarines were lost in the area where the sequest went down and where they will be diving. Due to his deadpan conversational interactions, Mark is a hit with the crew when they give him the Raz. Mark dives from an underwater platform 200 feet deep and reaches 36,000 feet. He encounters a 4-chambered submarine and follows it into a base on the side of an undersea mountain. Act 4. Mark discovers an enormous undersea habitat adorned with works of art, as well as the obese Mr. Schubert, a maniacal scientist who has gained the assistance of kidnapped scientists from various nations via mind control bracelets. He seems to be working on a number of projects, including adapting humans to breathe water, interpreting the language of whales, and controlling the nuclear arsenals of the world to one particular end.
For 3,000 years, they've destroyed our land, air, water. Now they're going to finish each other off in one last big war.
How do you know that?
Well, mainly because I'm going to start it. You see, Mark, I have studied the human animal, not just from books, close up. And I've come to the conclusion there's no hope left for him but to start all over again. But this time, add some courtesy, good manners, a touch of discipline. You see that map? We're watching every nuclear missile-carrying submarine and ship in the world. Hundreds of them carrying thousands of missiles, each one aimed at a target in somebody else's country and all ready to be fired in case of war. We know their exact positions, the exact status of each missile, and where each one is aimed. Now, can you imagine what could be accomplished if one man could get control of all that power for just 30 seconds? Very shortly, a signal will be generated from this undersea mountain to every missile-carrying vessel in the oceans. That signal will penetrate every electronic defense, override every fail-safe system, and cause every sea-going missile in the world to destroy its prearranged target. Then we sit out that mess. We're gonna shake our planet down to her roots. Then we're gonna get up to speed again with fewer but considerably better quality people. Folks like you. Just like you. I want you to think about that as you go back to your quarters. And thank you.
Yes, Schubert has been watching James Bond movies and plans to destroy all the nations of the world with their own nuclear weapons. Now aware of Schubert's evil intent, Mark begins to move against Schubert, but quickly weakens out of the water. Mark soon finds himself in a suspended cage with Commander Roth, Dr. Merrill's friend from the beginning, who was friendly to Mark. They are lowered into the water to be drowned. Act 5. Unaware of Mark's nature, Schubert has provided the circumstances for Mark's recovery. He bends the bars and escapes the cage with Roth. Mark has a conversational confrontation with Schubert and defeats him with one of his own mind control bracelets. Mark floods the undersea habitat, and the scientists escape in Schubert's submarine. And Mark leaves Schubert as his undersea base destructs around him, although the fate of Schubert is left intentionally vague. Act 6. The Navy, as well as Dr. Merrill and Commander Roth, believe Mark to be dead, until he climbs up the side of the Elk River.
Mark! Are you all right?
Is something wrong?
No, nothing's wrong.
However, Mark decides to return to his aquatic life and has an emotional goodbye with Dr. Merrill. Swimming away, he reflects on his recent experiences and returns to a delighted Dr. Merrill, declaring, "I have not learned enough." Man from Atlantis aired Friday, March 4th, 1977 on NBC after Sanford & Son and Chico and the Man. It was on against the Brady Bunch Hour with Vincent Price and ABC News Close-Up on Cuba, the Castro Generation on ABC, and Sonny and Cher and Hunter, the James Franciscus series on CBS. It performed well, earning a 46% share of the TV audience. Man from Atlantis was directed by Lee H. Katzin and written by Mayo Simon. Simon is credited with co-creating Man from Atlantis, along with Herbert F. Solow, as related earlier. Simon is a writer, with not a large amount of TV and film credits, but still going back into the mid-50s with Playhouse 90 and General Electric Theater. Later, he wrote the screenplays to 1969's Marooned, 1974's Phase 4, and 1976's Future World. He has no TV or film credits after Man from Atlantis, but went on to write a number of plays. Simon's friend Herb Solow was a producer and has been a studio executive for MGM, Paramount, Desilu, Hanna-Barbera, NBC, and CBS. He was the production manager for The Courtship of Eddie's Father, Mission Impossible, Mannix, and the original Star Trek, among other series. You can hear Mayo Simon interviewed about Phase 4 on the Projection Booth podcast, episode 248. You can hear Herb Solow interviewed on the Comic Book Central podcast, episode 109. The music theme was by prolific composer Fred Karlin. We've come across Karlin's music before in Lucan. He composed themes for about 110 TV movies, series, and miniseries in the 70s and 80s. Production on this began in October of 1976, and this movie was intended from the start to serve as a potential series pilot. For some reason, airing it was delayed, and by the time it aired, the 3 additional Man from Atlantis TV movies were already in production. A significant portion of the movie was filmed aboard the naval vessel Elk River. The Elk River was built by the Brown Shipbuilding Company at the Houston shipyards. Brown produced nearly 350 vessels for the U.S. by the end of World War II. Launched in 1945, Elk River served nearly 56 years until it was decommissioned and disposed of in a training exercise in 2001. The scenes with Mark swimming in large tanks was shot at Marineland in Rancho Palos Verdes, California, which closed down in 1986. I found it interesting how the movie turns from a mysterious stranger with mild sci-fi elements into a James Bond movie at the halfway point. The taking of the world's nuclear arsenal was old hat by March of 1977. But the film that it is most like, The Spy Who Loved Me, would not be released until July of that year. And I was impressed with the sets, stunts, and practical effects on a 1977 TV movie. The dolphin-like swimming style seen in this movie was difficult and exhausting, according to Patrick Duffy. In fact, many of the swimming scenes of the now iconic swimming style that were recycled through the series were actually shots of stunt double Tom Morga, especially shots where he is swimming away from the camera or shot from above. A variation of the dolphin kick, it reportedly takes 4 times the energy of other swim techniques and can even be dangerous, performed submerged, as the swimmer can become exhausted and faces the possibility of drowning. I did have some nagging questions upon watching this movie. Mark's origins remain pretty much a mystery, but his existence implies the existence of a race of people like him, presumably the titular Atlanteans. But this is never commented on. Is the existence of Atlantis an accepted fact in this movie universe? The out-of-the-blue answer by the military supercomputer seems to suggest this. And exactly how did Mark communicate the proposed deal with Dr. Merrill before he had even spoken a word? These questions sort of remain unanswered. Man from Atlantis 2, The Death Scouts, aired May 7th, 1977, on NBC's Saturday Night at the Movies.
NBC Saturday Night at the Movies presents Man from Atlantis, starring Patrick Duffy and Belinda Montgomery.
ocean storm carries a strange being to shore, and he nears a death that medical science cannot stop, until a marine scientist returns him to the ocean and makes him live. Where is he from? The computer guesses. He is named Mark Harris and put through a series of tests to calculate his speed, agility, and strength. Though allowed to return to his ocean existence, Mark decides to help us further our exploration of the oceans and wants to gain knowledge about his human friends.
I have not learned enough.
And now, Man from Atlantis 2, The Death Scouts.
Dr. Miller Simon and Dr. Elizabeth Merrill are performing more detailed tests on Mark than we saw in the first film. A group of scuba divers out at sea on a dinghy are grabbed by humanoid creatures and disappear under the water. The Coast Guard asks the Foundation for Oceanic Research to investigate the mysterious disappearance of these scuba divers. Using the confiscated submarine from the first film, now called the Cetacean, the scientists investigate. Meanwhile, two of the divers we saw at the beginning emerge from the ocean, now with webbed hands and the ability to zap people and objects with an electric charge. The aliens have either taken over or duplicated the bodies of the missing divers. Mark discovers an alien vessel underwater that contains devices that have the same conch and waves symbol found on his yellow swim trunks. Later, after being captured, the female tells Mark he is from their planet. But Dr. Merrill is skeptical. Do the aliens hold the key to Mark's origins? Are they a threat to Earth, scouting it for possible takeover, or simply explorers? It's up to the Man from Atlantis and the Foundation to find out. Although, with a title like The Death Scouts, we kind of have an idea. For some reason, I found at least 3 conflicting air dates online, but the correct date is Saturday, May 7th, 1977. It was on against Hawaii Five-0 and The Carol Burnett Show on CBS, and The San Pedro Bums, the TV movie that inspired the San Pedro Beach Bums series on ABC. IMDb incorrectly lists April 22nd as the air date for this movie, but on that night, NBC aired Sanford and Son, Chico and the Man, The Rockford Files, and a new episode of Quincy, and not Man from Atlantis. This installment was written by Robert Lewin. This was his only writing credit for Man from Atlantis. He wrote numerous episodes for 27 other series, and later became a co-producer for Star Trek The Next Generation, before his death in 2004. The director was Mark Daniels, a very familiar name for any TV fan, with 115 directing credits for everything from I Love Lucy to Star Trek to Hogan's Heroes. The list is extensive, and he worked up until his death at age 77 in 1989. Kenneth Tiger joins the cast as Dr. Miller Simon, director of the Foundation for Oceanic Research. Tiger has an extensive acting background and currently appears on House of Cards and The Man in the High Castle as Heinrich Himmler. We'll see him on the remaining 2 TV movies. And Alan Fudge as C.W. Cranford is added to the cast. He'll appear on all remaining movies and episodes. C.W. is some kind of liaison between the Navy and the Foundation. They seem to answer to him. The plot in this one takes a turn to total science fiction now with aliens, which gives us an idea where the series may be headed. This movie recycles some swimming footage from the first film, as well as footage of the submarine exiting Schubert's undersea base destroyed in the first film, which now serves as the underground California coastline entrance of where the Foundation parks the sub when it's not used. Although such an installation would have likely cost hundreds of millions of dollars, yet CW complains about the $15,000 it costs every time they take the sub out. Also, we are given a clue as to the location of the fictional Foundation. The Foundation building is evidently within walking distance of two 11-year-old boys that found the alien rock in this film, either Huntington Beach or Newport Beach, from where Dr. Simon points to on the map. It's revealed in the next film the undersea opening and the Foundation is located at the fictional Hastings Point and is supposed to be secret, yet it has a sign and a public entrance. Also, exactly how the government drilled a secret submarine access tunnel in such a highly populated area frequented by tourists and coastline used by surfers year-round is not explained. This installment begins the convention of Mark being able to talk to the submarine crew while underwater due to a device given to him by Dr. Merrill. Unfortunately, the movie teased the idea of Mark's origin, but we are left with just as many questions as answers. Were the aliens telling the truth? Mark is clearly connected to them in some way. Perhaps he is even one of their species, but we are left to speculate on the details. We're also left with a positive environmental message at the end. Man from Atlantis 3, Killer Spores. Aired May 17, 1977 on NBC's Tuesday Movie of the Week, just 10 days after the prior film.
A NASA space probe returns bearing the killer spores, and they've got Mark Harris, the man from Atlantis. They're loose in the world, and they control Mark's friends, and that's the most dangerous battle. The Man from Atlantis, an all-new movie thriller, Tuesday at 8, 7 Central and Mountain Time, followed by the best of police story on NBC.
This installment again begins with a 1-minute recap, now cementing details about the Foundation.
He was found dying on a beach, and his life was saved by Dr. Elizabeth Merrill, a marine scientist. The computer could only guess at his real origins. After the Navy ran a series of tests of his strength, speed, and agility, Mark Harris and Dr. Merrill were assigned to a top-secret organization, the Foundation for Oceanic Research. Joining Dr. Miller Simon, a foremost scientist, and C.W. Crawford, Jr., the Foundation's administrator. After dealing with aliens from a water planet, Mark reflected on his past. The Cetacean, a spectacular quadrisphered submersible with unparalleled deep dive capabilities, continues to carry Mark, Elizabeth, Miller, and C.W. at the future exploration of the oceans.
We don't know what you'll run into.
The sea is my home.
Tonight, Man from Atlantis 3. Killer Spores.
The Cetacean is out doing research, and they get an urgent call from Starfleet Command. The Joint Space Agency, with the information that the Cetacean is the only ship in range to receive an incoming space probe about to land in the ocean. When they arrive, Mark is rendered unconscious by a screeching sound. Mark swims out to investigate. He returns, acting strangely, and the doctors discovered he has brought aboard hundreds of strange blue intelligent spores, only visible in the dark, or after they've been dyed to become viewable. They find Mark is controlled by these spores, and he makes bizarre statements and actions as he steals Elizabeth's car and drives away into the desert in a violent outburst, which nearly leads to his demise. After Mark is rescued, the spores leave and escape into the surrounding city, infecting people and inducing madness as a result, leaving them with blue-gray skin, but not killing them. They even infect Doctors Simon and Merrill, and eventually the crew of the Cetacean, as well as CW. But this time, the infections are different, controlled, and driven by a specific intent. It turns out the spores are part of a hive mind, and some were inadvertently taken away by the space probe. Their only desire is to return to space. It's up to the Man from Atlantis to save the day. This aired against McLaren's Writers, followed by MASH and Kojak on CBS, and Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley, followed by Rich Man, Poor Man, Book 1 on ABC. It was written by John D.F. Black and directed by Reza Badavi, who was an Iranian-American film director. He had directed episodes of so many popular TV series, including Mission Impossible, the Stop Susan Williams, segments of Cliffhangers, The Incredible Hulk, and others. Later, he would direct episodes of Superboy, Deep Space Nine, Baywatch, and Sliders. John D. F. Black was a seasoned TV writer who had written numerous episodes of TV westerns, as well as Star Trek, Mission Impossible, Hawaii Five-0, and we came across his name before as the writer of the Wonder Woman TV movie with Kathy Lee Crosby. John D. F. Black passed away during the production of this episode, and he'll be listed at the end in the memorial segment. In this installment, the structure of the stories begin to resemble Star Trek, complete with a view screen on the bridge, being the only ship in range, Mark acting as the Spock archetype, encountering new life forms, and so on. Toward the end of this movie, it is incredible how much the depiction of how the spores interact and take over other life forms resembled the Borg that would come along 12 years later. Elements of this story also reflect a great deal of the story elements of Star Trek's The Naked Time, also written by John D. F. Black. The spore effects that we see in this film were practical effects, meaning they were performed live on camera, and they appear as colored reflections or beams of light, and at one point a visible laser on various surfaces. When a spore infected a person, it was focused, then the light enlarged and dispersed. This was a simple, clever, effective way to visually depict the presence of the spores. Man from Atlantis 4, The Disappearances, aired Monday, June 20th, 1977, 5 weeks after the prior installment. Omitting any intro or recap, the film simply begins with Mark and the cetacean out doing research, with Mark identifying rocks by the specific minerals in them with no equipment. Later, back at the Foundation, a couple, Mr. Stoneman accompanied by a young woman, are clearly up to no good. They appear to case the Foundation under false pretenses. The woman, however, obviously takes a liking to Mark. Elizabeth drops Mark off at an indoor boardwalk carnival and goes out to meet this Mr. Stoneman alone on a pier. She soon feels uneasy, and her suspicions are justified when she is abducted. Mark sees her taken and runs to her aid, but is knocked out and locked in a storage locker on the pier. Later, finding Elizabeth's car on the pier, CW and Dr. Simon rescue Mark. The police identify Mr. Stoneman as a wanted criminal. Dr. Merrill was taken to an island in the Atlantic off the coast of Brazil, filled with well-built, shirtless henchmen, and is taken to a spa where her attitude about being abducted inexplicably changes. Now docile, compliant, and happy, she meets other marine biologists and freely gives information to Dr. Mary Smith, the leader of the secret base on this island. Days later, the cetacean approaches the island, and Smith launches an odd torpedo at it, which attaches to the hull. Mark is successful at removing it, saving the sub, and goes ashore with Dr. Simon. Dr. Simon and Mark are taken to the spa, and soon Simon and Elizabeth are only too happy to play the piano and sing. The spa waters have no effect on Mark, who wanders the facility and finds Smith's rocket, Ararat. Yes, she is planning to escape Earth and take selected humans with her. Mark uses his innate biochemical and mineral detecting abilities to counteract the lithium and other minerals in the spa waters, and soon all the kidnapped people revert to their normal state. Defeated, Smith enters her rocket alone, launching herself to a new life away from Earth. This aired Monday, June 20th, 1977, after the Mulligan's Stew 90-minute pilot. It was on against All's Fair, followed by Sonny and Cher on CBS, and Monday Night Baseball on ABC. By this time, the Man from Atlantis movies were becoming popular, and this installment was the top-rated show of the week, with a 25.1 rating, representing 17.9 million viewers. This installment was written by Luther Murdoch and Jerry Soule and directed by Charles S. Dubin. Murdoch wrote 2 additional Man from Atlantis episodes and little else. Jerry Soule has penned episodes of Alfred Hitchcock Presents, The Twilight Zone, The Outer Limits, and Star Trek, including the classic episode This Side of Paradise, which we see story elements of here. Charles S. Dubin was a well-known TV director since the dawn of television, with Tales of Tomorrow, Ironside, Hawaii Five-0, Kojak, and MASH under his belt, and would go on to direct episodes of After MASH, Starman, and Matlock, just a touch on the 107 directing credits during his life. This was his only Man from Atlantis credit. And we have another Bond-type villain just like the first film. And if that first plot resembled The Spy Who Loved Me, this one was more a variation on Moonraker, with Hugo Drax and his shuttle full of new Adams and Eves. But this Man from Atlantis installment aired a full 2 years before Moonraker was released. Instead of being depicted as evil or megalomaniacal, Dr. Smith has a somewhat sympathetic portrayal, with Elizabeth and Mark wondering at the end if she'll ever find the planet she sought. The preposterousness of a single human in a conventional rocket even being able to reach and set up residence on another planet nearly 11 light-years away is glossed over. The star Smith was headed to was Epsilon Eridani. Only in the last 18 years has it even been suggested Eridani had an extrasolar planet, but the evidence for one is sufficient enough that it has received a name. In 2015, the International Astronomical Union named the star Ron and the planet Aegir. It is hardly surprising this star system would be mentioned by writer Jerry Soule. The star system gets name-dropped a lot. It pops up in Star Trek reference books as one of the suggested systems for the location of planet Vulcan, and was later where Babylon 5 was said to be located. This was a shorter movie than the others, having a 90-minute airtime. It runs just over an hour 14 minutes without commercials. I get the feeling that more than one scene was possibly edited down, as it seemed like some dialogue was missing and there were some edit jumps. This is just speculation on my part. This installment seems to establish a new time limit on Mark being on dry land. He must return to water every 4 hours or he risks death. Even so, it seems he was left overnight in the shed, well past the 4-hour time frame. Perhaps Elizabeth was lying to the bad guys to make his situation seem more urgent to them. And this movie marks the first on-screen appearance by actor Ernie Hudson, who appeared as a shirtless minion of Dr. Smith. Check out my interview with Ernie on Forgotten TV, episode 18. Bob Miner appeared as another minion. He is highly recognizable. A former champion bodybuilder, he entered stunt work in 1970 and has been seen on screen in numerous films such as Coffee, Foxy Brown, Rollerball, Commando, and others. And on television in Wonder Woman, Buck Rogers, Greatest American Hero, and Magnum P.I. He's just memorable from a ton of appearances. Pamela Peters Solo also appears. She is clearly related to producer Herb Solo, but I could never find out if she is his daughter, daughter-in-law, or niece. Man from Atlantis will return after these messages.
Luke Skywalker was just a farm boy until he received a mysterious message.
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope.
To rescue a beautiful princess.
I'm Luke Skywalker. I'm here to rescue you.
A little short for a stormtrooper.
And defend the forces of freedom against the Death Star.
Here they come.
The winner of 7 Academy Awards, the legendary Star Wars. Rated PG. Starts Friday at a theater near you.
Here's a hi-fi bargain from your nearby Radio Shack store. Save $100 on our exclusive realistic 77 AM/FM stereo receiver. Only $159.95 during the sale. With audio component features like FM muting, push-button tape monitor, main remote speaker switching, in a genuine walnut veneer case. The ideal control center for your new music system. The sale-priced realistic 77 receiver. Only at Radio Shack, a Tandy company.
Here's what some people are saying about the Projection Booth podcast.
This podcast takes no shortcut in producing outstanding content. How they haven't become more widely recognized is beyond me.
I love this show. Smart commentary, in-depth interviews, and great production.
It's obvious how serious these guys take their podcast and bring that next level of professionalism that anyone would be hard-pressed to match.
The Projection Booth podcast, with new episodes available every week at projectionboothpodcast.com.
This is Sam Jones / Gordon, and you're listening to Forgotten TV. So don't forget, all right? Stay tuned. Forgotten TV.
Man from Atlantis, the series. Episode 1, Meltdown. Aired September 22nd, 1977, on Thursday night at 8 p.m. Central. Victor Buono returns as Mr. Schubert. And Dee Wallace makes a brief, very early appearance as the hot dog stand owner. And we now get a proper series opening.
Mark, good to see you again. Oh, that's going to be solid ice in a matter of minutes.
What do you want from me, Mr. Schubert?
I want you studied, genetically studied. Welcome to your home, Mark. I have some reports here you must be waiting to see, the water receding and all that, as promised. Do something, Brad.
Mr. Schubert is back and up to no good. Mark and the Foundation detect a 6-inch rise in global sea levels, and the White House informs CW Schubert has offered to return the sea levels to normal in exchange for Mark Harris. Schubert is using large-scale microwaves to melt the ice in the Chukchi Sea in the Arctic just north of the Bering Strait. Mark defeats Schubert's device and is captured. Schubert has a pool with a ridiculous underwater living room, complete with waterproofed magazines, set up for Mark, but lets him go, inviting him to return as the sea levels again rise. But will he really stop his worldwide attack on the world's oceans? Or will he find he is no match for the Man from Atlantis? So, several notes here. First, the Dr. Simon character was dropped and didn't make it into the series. The Cetacean now has a smaller, multiracial regular crew, new uniforms with insignia patches on the collars, and one of the crew members is a familiar face. Jean Marie Hahn plays crew member Jane. Hahn was previously Ruth on Ark 2. In the 80s, she quit acting and is now a pharmacist in Southern California. Mark is at the con on the sub now. He gives orders, and the dynamic of the crew seems to suggest he is in a position of command, but none of this is explained. He also inexplicably now has sonar, something not mentioned before. In general, the episode has better production values with new underwater scenes. The Foundation has a new Seagate entrance and a more elaborate docking and departure procedure footage, which is shown off in this episode. Man from Atlantis wasn't on for the next 2 weeks due to sporting events. It returned on October 13th with 5 new episodes in a row. Episode 2, The Mudworm.
What are you doing?
Letting it out.
Why?
Otherwise it will tear through the bottom of the ship.
There won't be a satellite in the skies or a missile base in the world that won't be under my control.
Mark, you talk as if it were alive.
I believe it is.
Look at it, it's...
Get out as fast as you can!
An advanced robotic underwater probe Schubert calls the Mudworm, that's Mobile Undersea Device with Oceanographic Research Module, is attacking ships. When Mark confronts this mechanical marvel, he learns the device has become sentient. Meanwhile, Schubert eats banana splits, sea urchins, and sliced peaches out of a can. Oh no. With this episode, we see a decided, disappointing tonal shift in the show. While all 4 TV movies were played straight and serious with the normal amount of suspension of disbelief you would give science fiction, and the initial series episode seemed to have serious stakes, this episode starts with a scene of Schubert's gluttony and goofy dialogue with his assistant Brent that lasts an incredible 4 minutes. Seeing Schubert again this soon in the show is a poor decision in the first place, but his depiction now removes him as a serious threat going forward. The main plot and action of the show takes a left turn into silliness, much akin to Lost in Space. All this makes the show very hard to take seriously from this point. Much more about this later in Behind the Scenes. There is a great bit between Mark and an encyclopedia salesman that was the best scene in this episode. Do you remember those? The cost of the encyclopedia set he tried to sell Mark was about $1,000 for 24 volumes, which indeed was what many sets used to cost then. The Encyclopedia Britannica ran $1,399 as late as 1988. You almost can't give print encyclopedias away now. Episode 3, Hawk of Mu.
My place is just up here, and we could
converse more quietly.
Think of what a union it would cement. Schubert and Harris.
In an underwater cave, Mark discovers the stone statue of a hawk, an ancient artifact from the lost civilization of Mu. The Foundation donates it to a museum, but the statue has the ability to remove power from any given area, creating blackouts, which makes it highly coveted by the power-hungry Mr. Schubert. Mark tries to prevent Schubert from stealing the statue, but Schubert involves his daughter, Juliet, to get Mark arrested. Mark must escape jail and relieve Schubert of the dangerous artifact. Okay, this wasn't nearly as insufferable as the last episode, but the goofy interactions between Schubert and Brent continue. And the Fantasy Island house is used in the opening scene. Yes, Mr. Rourke's Queen Anne cottage, seen in every episode of Fantasy Island, is where Schubert is hiding out. Episode 4, Giant, with Ted Neely and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Now, easy, Clark.
You steal from Thark? You ruin his work?
You have placed my world in danger. That is the only reason I am here.
I've done nothing to harm your kind.
You are draining our oceans dry.
Well done!
A giant underneath the ocean has drilled a drain hole at the bottom of the sea, draining the world's oceans in order to operate a gold sluice. Yes, I just uttered those words. Investigating a mysterious hole at the bottom of the sea draining the ocean, the crew pick up injured diver Muldoon, who turns out to be one slick character. We have a bar brawl. Then Mark and Muldoon go down the drain hole of the sea and emerge out a water well in another dimension that looks mysteriously like Vasquez Rocks, California, where water is invisible and the inhabitant is a giant named Thark. Muldoon is stranded in Thark's dimension due to his greed, and the adventure is so unbelievable, Mark will not tell Elizabeth what happened. It's hard to find words at this point. We have firmly turned a corner now into brain-off mode with an embarrassingly ridiculous plotline straight out of a Saturday morning cartoon. This was the first of several attempts to get Mark out of the water and utilize easily accessible locations and backlots to simplify production and reduce costs. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar stars as the titular Giant. This was only his third on-screen appearance. The production used forced perspective and other set tricks to enhance his 7'2" height. Neely was most famously Jesus Christ in the 1973 film version of Jesus Christ Superstar. The writer of this episode was Michael I. Wagner in his 5th writing credit. If that name sounds familiar, he was the co-creator and primary force behind Probe, considered in episode 22. Patrick Duffy, I noted, had a mild sunburn visible in this episode, and we only have 9 more episodes to go. Episode 5, Man o' War.
A jellyfish killed a great white shark and ate it. I have met King Neptune. You know who he is? Where he is?
Pooh. Pooh.
You fiend! Get a fire axe!
The fire axe?
Fire axe! Fire axe!
Do you realize how fast that creature can swim through the water? You're faster.
The annoying Schubert is back, and he has a giant GMO jellyfish he's going to use to attack a beachside resort in a simple extortion scheme. His prior schemes have eaten away at his resources, and he's got to make some money. In a scene as if out of Ed Wood, we are treated to Mark fighting a purple garbage bag with tentacles. Another episode with plot elements seemingly straight out of Super Friends. This episode has a now offensive portrayal with a white actor with dark face makeup using a ridiculous accent playing an Indian man in a turban. And true to the prior Schubert installment, scenes with he and his simpering assistant Brent are now simply comic relief. Schubert's assistant Brent seemed like a combination of Smithers and Paul Lynde. There was a definite homosexual subtext in his portrayal by actor Robert Lucier. He seemed like a goofy, loyal servant until this episode, where it is revealed Schubert has motel room negatives he holds over Brent that he seems very embarrassed about. This is the last time we see Brent. Episode 6, Shootout at Land's End, with Pernell Roberts.
Who are you?
His brother?
Nobody said nothing about him having no twin brother.
As a matter of fact, we come to talk to you about a job. You know, one nice thing about kicking off, I don't have to look at your ugly puss anymore. Hey, fellas, what's going on? Well, how did you know about me? I mean, that we look so much alike. I felt the pain where you were stabbed.
Where have you been? What did you find?
It's the Old West episode. As the cetacean heads on a new course to investigate a volcano, Mark feels inexplicable pains and is drawn to investigate. He emerges on an Old West island? Mark has a Corsican brother-type twin, from which he feels sympathetic pain the closer they get to each other. Mark's double ties him up and swims out to the cetacean to check it out. Mark gets in the middle of a love triangle between Billy, local cattle baron Clint Hollister, and local professional lady Carla. There's a shootout, and the good guys win with no one getting killed. And just like 2 episodes ago, Mark keeps the details of his Old West adventure to himself. Stop this ride, I want to get off. No effort is being made at this point to provide explanations for the outlandish situations Mark finds himself in. Mark simply emerges from the water onto what looks like an island, and it's the Old West. Elizabeth and the crew are shocked and surprised when Mark's tracker goes dark, yet this has already happened countless times, starting with the first movie. For what is now written to be such a kid-friendly TV show, there's a surprisingly adult situation with Carla, obviously an Old West prostitute. Interestingly, Carla, or the actress who plays her, doesn't appear in the credits or on the IMDb page for this episode. And this episode uses split-screen photography to give us two Patrick Duffys at the same time. 2 weeks later, NBC airs Episode 7, Crystal Water, Sudden Death, with Renee Auberjonois.
You're an amateur, Mr. Havergal. You're fired. Now, the rest of you, listen to me.
Nobody's listening to you from here on in, fat man.
I pay your salary.
Mark, are you telling me there are water-breathing people like yourself?
No, they breathe air.
Imagine what will happen to broadcasting all over the world once I get those crystals into a satellite.
What I have told you is true.
Prophet says, lie!
Schubert is back, his money problems evidently over, with a new submarine, snarky assistant, and crew, seeking special technetic crystals for a satellite to black out world broadcasts. The cetacean heads out to track him down, and they find a force field which Mark enters, and finds an open-air world under the ocean inhabited by a race of completely white humanoids out to protect their crystals, whom Schubert defeats with a flashlight. The crystals power the force field that protects their habitat, and when Schubert steals them, it's up to the Man from Atlantis to save the day. Okay, in the third halfway decent attempt at a plot in this series, a decidedly less goofy Schubert makes his final appearance, as we will not see him again. In the plot, there seem to be a couple of Star Trek callbacks, from Mr. Spock's inner eyelid to elements from For the World is Hollow and I Have Touched the Sky. With a rewrite and better production value, this wouldn't have been a terrible episode. We are given a race of humanoids that have a culture, motives, and possibly a religion, instead of a monster or robot of the week. Unfortunately, the limited budget left something to be desired in their depiction, as the actors wore white bodysuits, and some appeared to not be wearing underwear. Yikes. There were new miniatures and sets made for this episode. The Foundation has a new underground command office that connects directly to the entry hatch of the sub, with a new lighted walk-through passageway and a much more elaborate-looking dock for the sub. Unfortunately, following this episode, NBC canceled Man from Atlantis, along with the very short-lived Mulligan Stew, The Oregon Trail, and Rossetti and Ryan. 2 more episodes would air in December, but the remaining 4 would not start airing until April. Episode 8, The Naked Montague, aired December 6, 1977.
One of your family, no doubt. A naked Montague. I must execute it.
If you wish to go, I could stay and entertain Sir Mark.
Tybalt, she has married Romeo. The feud is ended.
I will not fight you, Tybalt. Oh, you will, or I'll split you where you stand.
Undersea seismic activity traps Mark under falling boulders, and he wakes up on dry land and is found by Romeo and Mercutio Montague, as he inexplicably finds himself in the middle of Romeo and Juliet. Because of course. Meanwhile, CW enlists the Navy as well as the Russians to help rescue Mark, and we get a rare scene of crewman Jomo, Dick Anthony Williams, leaving the sub suited up in scuba gear. We get a version of the story which ends with Juliet's suicide. Mark finds the exit of the world he is in and returns to the cetacean. Upon Elizabeth explaining the end of the story, Mark returns to that world just in time to avoid a tragic ending for the couple. Here we have yet another attempt to get Mark out of the water and on dry land to simplify production and reduce expenses. And a young John Shea appears as a decent Romeo in one of his earliest roles. He later played Robert F. Kennedy in the 1983 miniseries Kennedy, but is probably most recognizable as Lex Luthor from 25 episodes of Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman. Dick Williams, who plays Jomo, part of the bridge crew, was one of those working actors that pops up everywhere. Lou Grant, The Powers of Matthew Starr, 227, Homefront, X-Files, The Shield. In film, he was in The Mac, The Deep, The Jerk, The Star Chamber, and The Players Club. Dick Anthony Williams died in 2012 at age 77. Episode 9, C.W. Hyde.
Mark, you don't realize what I've done under the influence. I have lied. I've fallen in with the kind of people only a monster would fall in with.
It's your funeral.
You don't look that dangerous. Try me. Later, Sonny.
Darling, you look awful. You need taking care of.
Either you tell me where that black box is, or your secretary can type without fingers.
A chemical accidentally drips into CW's coffee, causing a physical and personality transformation. Meanwhile, Mark and Elizabeth are sent to retrieve a lost survey probe. But unknown to them, it has a self-destruct booby trap, which CW didn't get to mention before he went into his altered state. Yes, this episode totally is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Even though this was a fairly easy idea and a little silly, we actually did get a little character development for CW, which is more than we can ever say for Elizabeth throughout this whole series. And for a show supposedly written to appeal to family viewers, CW visits a fairly adult establishment after his transformation, leading to an even more adult situation. I will say this episode really shows off how the sub-level command center and office they built for episode 7 is set up in a nice Steadicam shot. And it was cool to see a pre-WKRP Frank Bonner in a bit part as a bartender, character actor Val Avery as a mobster. He had 170 acting credits with multiple appearances on Gunsmoke, The Fugitive, Mannix, Barnaby Jones. He was a regular face on 60s and 70s TV. And Pamela Peters Solo is back, this time as Secretary Sarah. Again, I could not find their actual family relation stated online, but she is clearly related to producer Herb Solo. After 4 months with no new episodes, on April 18th, 1978, Episode 10, Scavenger Hunt, aired, with Ted Neely and Ted Cassidy.
The powerful one will require at least one giant pearl before the turning of the moon.
It shall be so. Well, the United Nations voted to seal the stuff in those special canisters and plant it where no one could get at it.
You accept these tokens and this sacrifice, so powerful one.
I will take the canisters now, Muldoon. Do what you have to do.
Yes, everyone's favorite scoundrel no one asked to come back returns. Muldoon is back, this time claiming to speak for a two-headed, land-based seahorse god to the natives of a Polynesian island, who he scams out of both wives and giant pearls. The creature in this one is a reject from either Lost in Space or Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. I can't figure out which. Tony Urbano was the man in the suit who operated the seahorse heads with his hands. He later was a puppeteer on Barbara Mandrell and the Mandrell Sisters. Remember Truck Shackley and the Texas Critters? He also did puppeteering work on Flight of the Navigator and Short Circuit. And I don't even know where to begin with the social and racial politics of everything presented here. The island is called Cholo Island, and the natives are clearly a mix of Caucasian, Asian, and Latino actors standing in for Polynesians. The word cholo was originally a derogatory Spanish word indicating an individual of mixed or questionable ethnic heritage. The word has evolved into a number of additional modern-day meanings I'm not getting into, but I think it was pretty clear writer Peter Allen Fields was trying to make this an inside joke. He later wrote or co-wrote 3 excellent episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, Half a Life, Cost of Living, and The Inner Light. And yes, Ted Cassidy appeared in this episode. undoubtedly best known as Lurch from the Addams Family. However, he had a number of guest star appearances throughout the 60s and 70s, usually when the script called for a tall, imposing presence. I Dream of Jeannie, Tarzan, The New Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, Bonanza, as well as Gene Roddenberry's forgotten TV movies, Genesis 2 and Planet Earth. He also became a prolific voice actor in everything from Star Trek to Space Ghost, The Super Friends, and Captain Caveman. Ted Cassidy died far too young in 1979 at age 46. Episode 11, Imp, with Richard Gautier and Pat Morita.
We really got you that time, didn't we? You were not alone? Put him on a crowded bus or train. Think what would happen if he were to get to the driver. Or if he touched the pilot of an airplane in flight. I want to shake your hand.
No. Not with you. You're down there, people.
Duke, don't!
Stay there!
Uh-oh. Company. Hurry up, Duke!
Here I come!
A playful sea elf named Moby enters the Triton undersea habitat, and when his touch reverts the minds of the men on board to that of small children, they go swimming and drown. When the cetacean is sent to investigate, Moby sneaks on board, and he is brought back to shore and escapes up the elevator into the city, threatening all who come in contact with him. This episode guest starred Pat Morita as Moby. Morita had already been starring as Arnold on Happy Days and was a popular guest star at this point, appearing in Chico and the Man, Starsky and Hutch, The Love Boat, The Incredible Hulk, as well as his role as Ah Chu on Sanford and Son, before his breakout role as Mr. Miyagi in 1984's The Karate Kid. And this was another episode where silly isn't sufficient enough to describe it. These episodes were clearly filmed prior to the cancellation, and the network was just burning through them, filling airtime. But perhaps the producers saw the writing on the wall with the ratings by this point and had stopped trying. Incredibly, this was written by Shimon Winselberg, who admittedly has written his share of silliness on Lost in Space, but also Dagger of the Mind and the Galileo 7 episodes of Star Trek under the pseudonym S. Bar David. However, visually, this was a well-staged and shot episode directed by Paul Crancy, who we'll cross paths with again when I consider Logan's Run. We get nice camera pans, and the underground facility and sub finally look realistically portrayed, with plenty of extras performing tasks in the background, and more detailed departing and docking procedures. Sadly, it looks like they figured out all these things with only 2 episodes left. Episode 12, The Siren, with Neville Brand and Laurette Spang.
Kill that pet of hers. Unless she sings, of course.
There's only one creature in the sea that can make a sound like that.
Mythology. You're going to describe me as siren.
Most legends have their base in fact.
There are no such things as sirens.
A group of pirates on a submarine use an imprisoned mermaid that is also a siren to capture an important government official. When Mark and the cetacean follow up to investigate, the pirates attack the cetacean, leaving Mark to outsmart the pirates and save their prisoners. Dr. Elizabeth Merrill is nowhere to be seen in these last 2 episodes, and a new science officer, Jenny Reynolds, makes a one-off appearance who we know nothing about. In the show, we're simply told Elizabeth is on assignment in Washington. And this is the second and last Michael I. Wagner written episode, and one of the few less goofy ones, even with that plot description. The villains are played straight and menacing and are presented as a true threat. Laurette Spang appears briefly in a couple scenes. She, of course, would be very familiar to anyone that watched Battlestar Galactica, where she played Starbuck's on-again, off-again love interest, Cassiopeia. Episode 13, Deadly Carnival, aired June 6, 1978, with Billy Barty Anthony James and Sharon Farrell.
Hey, you want to go to work?
The carnival? It's not exactly my line.
He talked. And you still ain't seen no bubbles, right?
Get out! Oh, we're gonna put you on tonight as the incredible Man from Atlantis!
I thought you'd never ask. I would like to see you tonight.
And just in case you get absent-minded again.
A couple of 2-bit carnival sideshow performers plan to rob ancient gold Egyptian artifacts from a museum using an underwater passageway. They get on the government's radar when their underwater man dies during a test run. Mark goes undercover as himself at the carnival to catch the thieves. The well-known Billy Barty appeared in this episode, as well as character actor Anthony James. He nearly always plays a bad guy, and you've seen him in everything from Buck Rogers to the A-Team, as well as in films like Blue Thunder and Unforgiven. And this was another episode with a more serious tone and the villains mean business. But more than that, this final outing has a completely different structure and setup than any prior episode. The cetacean, as well as Elizabeth, are not seen or mentioned. For the first time, Mark is given a love interest, and it is even hinted that they were intimate. The episode was not ocean-based and had a very conventional plot with a familiar feel comparable to any number of hero adventure shows of the time. Was this a hint of a series' directional change had it not been canceled? We may never know. Man from Atlantis will return after these messages.
I'm spending Wednesday night at the in-laws, but I'm not missing the Wednesday night movie.
I'm working the late shift, but I'm not missing the late show.
Thanks to Sony's revolutionary Betamax deck, which hooks up to any TV set, now you can automatically videotape your favorite show even when you're not home and watch it anytime you want.
Good morning, gentlemen. I'm going home to watch the late show.
Yes, sir. Give me a taco and make that 2 tacos. 2 tacos? Okay. What's that? That's a burrito supreme. Sour cream, fresh lettuce and tomatoes. Ooh, I'll have one of those instead. Burrito supreme. What's that? Oh, that's a tostada. I have one of those too. Okay. Wait a minute. What's that? Oh, that is an enchilito. Now that's got pinto beans, cheese on the top. On second thought, what was I ordered first? The Taco Bell.
Hey comic book fans, I'm Joe Stuber, producer and host of Comic Book Central, where each and every week I welcome a legendary talent to the Comic Book Central lair to talk about bringing comic books to life.
Greetings, true believers. This is Stan Lee.
Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the one, the only, William Shatner. Catch the very latest episodes at the website comicbookcentral.net and be sure to join me each and every week for Comic Book Central.
This is John Rhys Davis.
Hi, everyone. This is Summer Glau.
Hi, this is Trisha Helfer, number 6 from Battlestar Galactica.
Hey, this is Dean Cain, Superman from Lois and Clark, and you're listening to Comic Book Central,
where comic books come to life.
Excelsior.
Behind the scenes. Man from Atlantis was not a show I grew up watching since it was on nights we simply were never home. I vaguely recall catching one of the movies on a rerun or possibly renting one on VHS in the mid-'80s, but I have no specific memories of plot lines or details, so for all practical purposes, this was my first viewing of it. There is a lot to unpack with this series. Let's begin with the actors and how they came to be cast in Man from Atlantis. Patrick Duffy was born in Montana in 1949 and will recall childhood hunting trips and rodeos growing up there. Moving to Seattle at 13, he went out for various athletics in school, and in high school was encouraged by his drama teacher to go into theater. He was one of 12 students selected for a 4-year acting scholarship at the University of Washington. He learned fencing, juggling, singing, speech, and voice training over a 7-hour daily class schedule. After marrying and moving to New York with his wife, he started acting in off-Broadway plays until his agent suggested moving to the Los Angeles area. There, between handyman jobs, he acted in bit parts in movies, as well as a couple of bit parts on TV and a commercial for Taco Bell, which you heard in one of the breaks. Of course, he went to numerous auditions, including a role for some character named Luke Skywalker. I actually went into a meeting, and I didn't even know who he was, for Luke Skywalker on Star Wars. And I walked into a room. It was a bare room at Goldwyn Studios. And I sat in this chair for the longest time, and it was empty, and somebody came in and went through a file cabinet and then left. And then the secretary came in and said, "Thank you very much." I said, "Okay," because I had never worked. I didn't know how it was all done. The guy who directed it, Lucas, was a very young chap. I went in and he was just sitting there in a chair, and I thought he was just another actor auditioning. I probably said something very rude to him. So how did an unknown actor get cast as the lead in a series? Well, he was one of numerous actors auditioning for Man from Atlantis, and initially was told he was wrong for the role. I auditioned for it, as did countless others, and the casting director said I was wrong for the role, and thank you very much. About a month later, she saw my bit on Switch, and thought, that's not at all what I thought he'd be like. That night, she called the producer, Herb Solo, and said they'd have to call me in for an interview. My screen test was sent to the networks. That was when I was very thin. I weighed 160 to 165. The reaction was, he's too slight for the part. And the test I had done was like most tests, haphazardly shot in whatever standing set was available. And they dunked my head in this big pot of water, literally. So they got Patrick Duffy with the dry look and Patrick Duffy with the wet look. Anyway, we did another test the way it should have been done the first time. It was practically a commercial for Patrick Duffy. We had reflected light off the water effects, the balustrade of a boat, the special contact lenses, and the makeup for the hands. I puffed up my chest as best I could and tried to look very swarthy. They liked the test better. 2 days before we were to start shooting, I was signed to do the role, right down to the wire. In addition to puffing out his chest, the custom muscular bodysuit he and Herb Solo had makeup artist Fred Phillips put together had to have helped. Duffy wore it under a tight-fitting shirt and sweater to a meeting with NBC executives who were quite impressed with his new physique and signed him for the part. Duffy then went on an intensive self-directed workout and protein diet to actually gain the muscle NBC thought he had. Duffy has kept up his fitness routine over the years to maintain his slim physique. However, he turned out not to be the first choice for the role. Christopher Reeve had been offered the role and turned it down. He was acting in the play A Matter of Gravity, which had just moved to Los Angeles. He took a small part in the film Gray Lady Down that year, then was offered another role. If he had taken the Man from Atlantis role, he would have been busy throughout 1977, unavailable to prepare for and film his iconic portrayal of Superman. Belinda Montgomery, on the other hand, had been around the block a few times as bit part and TV guest actor with nearly 50 TV and film appearances before being cast in Man from Atlantis. Throughout the 70s, she appeared in shows like The Sixth Sense, Barnaby Jones, Moving On, Marcus Welby, and Medical Center, as well as a number of TV movies. Born in 1950 in Manitoba, she arrived in Hollywood and began acting while still in her late teens, and ended up landing a contract with Universal, leading to her numerous acting jobs and being one of the last of the television studio contract actors. Her younger brother is Lee Montgomery. You might remember him in the 1972 cult thriller Ben, as well as the boy threatened by the possessed house in the Dan Curtis film Burnt Offerings. Sister Tanis G. Montgomery also showed up on film and TV in the 70s in The Brady Bunch, The Partridge Family, and Happy Days. Man from Atlantis was Belinda's first regular series role. Belinda recalls meeting the production crew. I remember going in and meeting with the producers, Herb Solo and his colleagues, and we just all sort of clicked. That same day, they were auditioning people to play the title role. One of these people was Patrick Duffy, and they were already considering me for the female lead, so I did a little audition on film for them with Patrick. I remember Patrick saying, "Oh yeah, she's Dr. Elizabeth Merrill." And I said, "I love Patrick." And it just worked well between us from the beginning. We had great fun together because we just clicked. So we loved doing the pilot. It was just great. The Cetacean Submarine was the work of FX man Gene Warren. He had done visual effects for the aforementioned Atlantis, the Lost Continent in 1961, 1960's The Time Machine, and the 1979 film Meteor. His work in 1977's Black Sunday went uncredited by Paramount Pictures for whatever reason. He was also the director of stop-motion effects on TV's Land of the Lost. Users at the message board, the RFP, a costuming and prop maker's site, did careful examination of the paint job and design details from freeze frames as well as production photos, and concluded there were 2 models used for the submarine. Once you notice the differences in the windows on the 2 models, you can easily tell which model is used in any particular shot. RFP user Cracker Jazz even scratch-built 2 of his own cetacean models, just like on the show, with impressive results. One of the original production models was a 38-inch long miniature, which was actually sold at auction in 2009 to a collector for $3,000. This was the one used in the original movies, and it looked to be actually submerged in the scenes shot for the films. The other was a larger 5-foot-long model that was suspended on wires in a smoke-filled set and shot dry, meaning the model was not actually submerged in water. Bubbles and water were optically added after the model shots were filmed. You can usually tell the difference as the wires were occasionally visible on series episodes when the original movie footage is not reused, and the quality of some of the effects shot for the series is just not as good as those from the TV movies. Patrick went through a lot to get the underwater footage and stunts filmed on the show. Patrick would fill his nasal cavity with water to prevent air bubbles escaping from his nose or mouth while being filmed when he was supposedly talking underwater. He would make mouth movements to match pre-recorded dialogue, which would be filmed through the glass of a water tank. This would give him occasional ear infections. He also frequently wore full-coverage, phosphorescent green sclera contact lenses that gave the actor multiple eye infections. Since his character frequently ran around barefoot, he was often running on cement and on the ground on location. This damaged nerves on his feet, and he developed Morton's neuroma as a result. In 1989, he even underwent surgery to remove damaged nerves, but still struggles with lasting foot pain. What was the critical reaction at the time to Man from Atlantis? When the Man from Atlantis premiered last season as a set of 2-hour movies, the shows had several pluses to commend them. Now it's back as a series, but few will recognize their old friend, despite the fact he's still clad in the same unattractive swimsuit. As mysteriously as it arrived on the scene, the quality of the originals has disappeared. The script is a silly exercise in technical jargon and blinking lights. It's directed with one hand in the cookie jar, the other in the playpen, with the resulting hour of interest only to preteens. Daily Variety. Tom Shales of the Washington Post said, "There is nothing wrong with Man from Atlantis that a quick exile to a Saturday morning time slot wouldn't cure. NBC has a peculiar devotion to silly heroes in prime time, but the network doesn't give these shows enough adult appeal. Watch for a crash dive." Ken Hoffman of the Houston Post was even more direct. "It was all wet." Producer Herman Miller defends the tone of the series. "If we had been able to include a laugh track on the Man from Atlantis, we could have let the audience know that, hey, this is a comedy. They needed permission to laugh. People didn't know what to make of it, and it confused them. It was actually a very funny series. But we got indignant letters from viewers who wrote, 'What have you done to this show?' Or, 'This is supposed to be science fiction. How dare you do this kind of stuff?' The people we heard from seemed to prefer the pilot film." Story editor Larry Alexander remembers one particular reaction to the direction of the series. "There was a science fiction magazine at the time that wrote us a brutal, nasty letter. It said, 'We were considering giving your show coverage. After seeing your show, we're not going to give you any coverage. You have treated science fiction with disrespect. I was stunned. I thought we had a nice, light show. If people want to blame the tongue-in-cheek for the show's failure, they can place the blame on my door completely. While many viewers were disappointed with this left turn the series took, writer Stephen Candle was having fun on the production. I loved that series. It was a hoot. Whatever I pitched, they bought. C.W. Hyde was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. We played it sideways, skewed. The Naked Montague was Romeo and Juliet. I not only carefully misquoted and requoted Shakespeare, I used the man from Atlantis to save the two lovers. He created a long and happy life for them. If the series had continued, I was planning to write 19,000 Leagues Below the Surface, S. Panza and Friend, Whore and Peace, Napoleon and Charlotte Russe, and anything else I could get away with. In other words, Man from Atlantis was a fantasy adventure with a sense of humor, a rare and happy combination. However, this view was not fully embraced by everyone, especially not the stars of the show. Patrick Duffy. The pilot and the first couple of 2-hour movies were the thing that really cemented it as legitimate science fiction. Then we sort of got off the rails a little bit. When we got into sort of Batman-quality superhero storylines and situations, it was fun to do because you got to do some crazy, silly stuff, but it didn't seem to me to hold up to the promise of the pilot. Belinda Montgomery. I was just really relieved when it ended. I loved the pilot, but the series didn't live up to it. It just became progressively silly, and it didn't have to be that way. It's just that the writing wasn't the same, because they didn't give the writers enough time, and they put these silly shows together. When Patrick and I celebrated the DVD release of the series at the Paley Center in Beverly Hills, and we discussed the series on stage with a crowd of people there, I reminded Pat, do you remember that one show where I had to say, it's the mudworm, and it's heading straight for us? We couldn't get through that scene, and we had to do it like 8 times, and the director was getting really ticked off at us, but it was getting really ridiculous after a while. It was so silly. Michael O'Herlihy, director of the episode Man o' War, said, I don't know if Man from Atlantis was science fiction or what the hell it was. It was really a bit silly. Again, it could have been a remarkable show, but they turned it into some sort of underwater satire, which was a terrible shame. Still, the TV movies were very popular, and the property did ride a moderate wave of popularity for a time. In October 1977, Patrick and Belinda appeared on The Mike Douglas Show, filmed on the bridge of the Cetacean. In November, Patrick and Belinda competed for NBC in the Battle of the Network Stars. Dell Publishing released 4 Man from Atlantis novelizations of the TV movies. Marvel Comics printed a monthly Man from Atlantis title, starting in February of 1978 that ran until August. Kenner began developing a toy line for Man from Atlantis. A few Man from Atlantis branded toys were advertised in its 1978 catalog, and more were planned. A sculpt for a Mr. Schubert action figure was done, as well as several concept drawings for vehicles. Mark and Elizabeth action figures were planned, and a toy submarine of the Cetacean. When the show was canceled, Kenner tried to rebrand a few of these toys, including the Cetacean sub-toy, under the Scuba Squad name in its 1978 industry catalog, but the toy line never sold. Man from Atlantis was among several series condemned by the PTA for excessive violence in 1978, along with Soap, Three's Company, Maude, Kojak, Welcome Back Kotter, The Red Fox Show, and the Adam Arkin sitcom Bustin' Loose. Critics of the PTA's recommendations comment their approved shows all featured white, middle-class families and women in stereotypical gender roles. Normally, 21 hours of television isn't nearly enough to enter syndication, but this series defied that normal convention. Contrary to claims by some websites that the show was never syndicated, Man from Atlantis was incredibly popular in China. In October 1979, UPI reported it would be the first American TV series to be shown on Chinese television, with the title translated to The Man from the Bottom of the Atlantic. By March of 1980, it was so popular, it was reported that a concert of classical music had to alter its start time so the audience could get home in time for Man from Atlantis. Larry Alexander relates the time he got an unexpected check in the mail. It was a huge hit in communist China. That was around 1984. I found this $25,000 check staring at me in the face. I enjoyed doing The Man from Atlantis tremendously. I would have watched it even if I hadn't written for it. Let's face it, how many witty science fiction programs does one come across? In 2014, the Chinese government flew Patrick and his wife to China to celebrate the 35th anniversary of Man from Atlantis debuting in that country. In the UK, its ITV airings beat Tom Baker's Doctor Who in the ratings. It also aired in Brazil, Portugal, Kuwait, the Netherlands, Germany, France, South Africa, Italy, and Israel. In 1982, Man from Atlantis started to enjoy some syndicated reruns in domestic TV markets. In Houston, it was shown on Broadcast Channel 20 on Sunday and Wednesday nights at 2 a.m. It was likely sold in some sort of syndication package along with other series, although I couldn't find details on that. Man from Atlantis was rerun through the mid-'80s. The original Man from Atlantis TV movie was released on VHS in 1986 for rental, and re-released in 1987 by Good Times Home Video for the sell-through market. I have to say, I don't think I've ever been so disappointed with a series following the TV movie, or in this case, movies. This show had so much potential, given its Star Trek-connected pedigree with Herb Solo. Even Bob Justman was involved in the original movie. But the direction the show was given by the network totally shifted the writing and tone of the show to be less serious and aimed toward younger viewers, emulating what sci-fi shows were doing a decade earlier on Lost in Space or Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, and retreading what Victor Buono had already done as King Tut on Batman. But this evidently was by design. Producer Herman Miller. We had a lot of conferences with the people at the network. They wanted to know what we planned to do with the series. We kicked around some ideas. Although the pilots had been terribly serious, we reached the notion of, let's have some fun with this series. That idea worked as far as we were concerned. NBC agreed to doing the show this way. Story editor Larry Alexander. The network executives were not science fiction fans. One of their main concerns was that women don't like science fiction. When they hired me, I said to Herb Solo, "You realize, of course, that what we're doing is Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea with an alien." Herb replied, "Well, yes, but no," which meant that's exactly what we were doing. Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea was a very strange show. I thought it was written for infants. On Man from Atlantis, we tried to be witty. That didn't turn out to be the key to success, but we knew that we had to play the story straight. If you wink at an audience and let them in on the joke, you're through. Alexander also admits he was the source of the total goofiness added to the Schubert character in the series. So, in an effort to be less serious and supposedly appeal to women, younger viewers, and non-science fiction fans, NBC aimed the show in the direction it went. One of the casualties of less sophisticated writing was character development. The character of Dr. Elizabeth Merrill is never fully developed. We know nothing about her, other than she is a marine biologist, a quite young one at that. She has a doctorate and seems to be under 30 and evidently single. Other characters remain likewise undeveloped. However, contrary to my thinking while binging the episodes, Belinda Montgomery didn't leave the show. Belinda is gracious and simply relates being sick as a reason for her being left out of the final episodes, but Larry Alexander will share further details. Belinda was a terrific person and a good actress. She didn't quit. She was dropped from the last 2 episodes. She was very upset about it. It was a decision by the brass. I don't know what that was all about. I do remember somebody saying that her Elizabeth Merrill character was slowing the show down and making it too soft. Keep in mind, this was when the show was in deep trouble. We all knew that it wasn't going to last, and the studio and network were doing everything they could to keep it going. After Man from Atlantis. The likable Patrick Duffy, immediately following the end of Man from Atlantis, was cast in the role of his lifetime. Starring as Bobby Ewing for 13 years on 326 episodes of the CBS mega hit Dallas, where he also cut his teeth directing on 29 episodes of that series. Immediately following the conclusion of Dallas, Duffy was cast in another hit series. For 7 seasons and 160 episodes, 49 of which he directed, he starred opposite Suzanne Summers on the Friday night sitcom Step by Step. This resulted in him being continuously employed on these regular TV roles for an incredible 22 years. But Duffy never forgot his desire to fill in the missing pieces of Mark Harris's life. After moving to his Oregon ranch in 2001, he used his downtime to write the first of his Man from Atlantis books. Not needing to confine his imagination to the special effects limitations of the 1970s, he has fleshed out an incredible life story of not just Mark Harris, but of his entire Atlantean race. Patrick Duffy's book, Man from Atlantis, the first of 3 planned novels, was released in 2016 and is now available in paperback and Kindle, and a link to it is in the show notes. These days, you can connect with Patrick Duffy on Facebook and Twitter, or on his website, patrickduffy.com. You can hear Patrick interviewed on the Comic Book Central podcast, episode 107. After Man from Atlantis, Belinda Montgomery acted in several TV movies and a number of TV guest star appearances, including the short-lived Whiz Kids, Blue Thunder, and Street Hawk. Then was cast as Sarah Miller, Aaron's wife on the 1 season of Aaron's Way in 1988. However, she is undoubtedly best remembered for her 4 years as Catherine Hauser, the mother of Doogie Howser, M.D. After that, roles became less common as she began taking care of her aging parents until their death. Since then, she decided to pursue her childhood passion of painting and attended art school. Many of her paintings can be seen at her website, belindamontgomery.com. You can hear Belinda interviewed on the Comic Book Central podcast, episode 108. Alan Fudge went on to appear in a number of films, Capricorn 1, Brainstorm, The Natural, and Edward Scissorhands, among others. He also had a recurring role on Seventh Heaven over the course of 10 years. Alan Fudge died in 2011 at age 67. Man from Atlantis movies and episodes sporadically appear and disappear on YouTube, but there's no need to hunt for it. In 2011, both the TV movies as well as the series were released by Warner on DVD. Both Patrick and Belinda were on hand at the Paley Center for Media to celebrate the DVD release, as well as field fan questions about the show and watch a screening of Meltdown, the series premiere episode. All 4 TV movies and 13 episodes can also be had in HD from Amazon Video for $20. Since this was a filmed series and the elements were obviously preserved, the quality is quite good, and I highly recommend it. If we want more classic TV released, we need to support the release of these titles when they happen. Unfortunately, no extras or bonus materials were produced for these releases, but I hope you enjoyed revisiting Man from Atlantis in this podcast, and that it can serve as sort of an unproduced DVD extra commentary that we never got. Atlantis has continued to be a subject of fascination in popular culture, and has appeared in countless TV shows, video games, and movies, including the current box office hit Aquaman. Will this ignite an interest in bringing back Man from Atlantis? Regardless of the silliness the series morphed into, people still have fond memories of it. And what 70s kid didn't try to swim like the Man from Atlantis? In 2017, the site Comic Book Reporter included Man from Atlantis in a list of 15 classic superhero shows that need TV reboots. In the current TV environment, with everything from Alf, MacGyver, Lost in Space, and The Twilight Zone getting brought back to TV, it may be only a matter of time before we see Mark Harris swim again on our TV screens. Forgotten TV Memorial.
You're Logan and Jessica from the City of Domes. I know all about you. Of course, I know everything that goes on here, but that usually isn't much. Who are you? My name is Rem.
English actor Donald Moffat has died at age 87. Born in 1930, Moffat accumulated a respectable body of work in his lifetime. In addition to Forgotten TV era appearances on Bonanza, Night Gallery, The $6 Million Man, Family, The Chisholms, and Dallas, Moffat was the android Rem on CBS's 1977 Logan's Run TV series. In film, he played LBJ on The Right Stuff, the President on Clear and Present Danger, and was in 1982's The Thing. He was also an accomplished Tony-nominated stage actor. Look for a Logan's Run podcast in very early 2019.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, Schlemiel, Schlemazel, Hassenbeff Incorporated. We're gonna do it. Give us any chance, we'll take it.
Actress Penny Marshall has died at age 75, best known as Laverne DeFazio on Happy Days, then Laverne and Shirley. She also has 15 directing credits, including the films Jumpin' Jack Flash, Big, Awakenings, and A League of Their Own. The Laverne character was carried over into animation with Laverne and Shirley in the Army, which morphed into the Mork and Mindy Laverne and Shirley Fawn's Hour. These animated adaptations will be considered in a future podcast on animated adaptations of live-action shows of the 1980s. Writer John D.F. Black has died at age 85. I've come across Mr. Black's name many times on Forgotten TV. Writer of the 1974 Kathy Lee Crosby Wonder Woman, Star Trek's The Naked Time, for which he was Hugo Award nominated, Del Vecchio, Man from Atlantis, 48 TV and film credits in all. Born in 1932, Black began his screenwriting with the 1957 film The Unearthly under the pseudonym Jeffrey Dennis. He honed his craft writing for a number of TV westerns throughout the 60s, then was hired as an associate producer on Star Trek, where he met his future wife, Mary. He wrote for numerous TV series in the 1970s after leaving Star Trek, including the Man from Atlantis installment The Killer Spores. Then would return to Trek in 1987, writing the episode Justice under the pseudonym Ralph Wills. He also served as story consultant on the fan-produced Star Trek Continues. He recently could be heard on Star Trek DVD set commentaries.
The end of the Civil War was near when quite accidentally the hero who sneezed abruptly ceased.
Actor Ken Berry has died at age 85. From F Troop to The Andy Griffith Show and Mayberry RFD to Mama's Family, and his many appearances on Fantasy Island, and let's not forget The Cat from Outer Space. Barry was an actor that was always likable, always funny, and he will be missed. Catherine Scotty McGregor has died at the age of 93. Born Dorlee Deanne McGregor in 1925 in Glendale, California, She grew up in Colorado and changed her name to Scotty when moving to New York, where she became a stage actress on Broadway, off-Broadway, and in regional theater in and around New York City. In 1970, she moved to Los Angeles and started appearing in television roles in The Young Lawyers, Mannix, Emergency, All in the Family, and Ironside, often as a secretary, teacher, or nurse, before being cast in the role that, for better or worse, would define her career. Then, getting ready to leave California to return to New York, she had a meeting with Michael Landon and was offered the role of Mrs. Olson on the Little House on the Prairie TV movie, which developed into a series that lasted 9 seasons. She was briefly married twice, once to actor Burt Remsen, then to actor Edward K. Martin 20 years later. She lived her final years at the Motion Picture and Television Fund long-term nursing care facility in Woodland Hills, California. One of her fellow residents had been Richard Bull, her on-screen husband on Little House.
You know, if it weren't for Val, this place would be a paradise.
Any place we can be together is paradise.
Pav, can the ship really break away?
I don't know.
Will we be able to get back aboard?
Marta, I don't know. But if we do have to stay here, would it be so very bad?
No. Not if you're with me.
Actress Celeste Yarnell has died at age 74. She may not have been the most prolific actress, but many will remember her appearance on Star Trek as Yeoman Martha Landon in the 1967 episode The Apple, a fan favorite. She was also on Bonanza, Hogan's Heroes, Land of the Giants, and McMillan and Wife, among other shows. In film, she was in Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice, and had feature roles on the cult horror films Beast of Blood from 1970 and The Velvet Vampire from 1971. In the last few decades, Celeste was a regular sight on the convention circuit as recently as August at the Las Vegas Convention, and appeared in recent documentaries about Elvis Presley and Star Trek, including William Shatner's Get a Life. In the last few years, Celeste has fought a very public battle with ovarian cancer, including the financial struggles this battle has caused. Coming in 2019 to Forgotten TV.
My name is Dylan Hunt. My story begins the day on which I died.
He ain't got no walking stick. He don't need no ball and chain. If he ain't got no can to kick, that don't mean nothing to James. Whoa, James singing, whoa, James.
Beans Baxter may look like your typical teenager, but this kid has one of the most dangerous after-school jobs going. You see, Beans Baxter is a spy. Not even his mother or little brother knows he's working on the side. Now it's up to Beans and the network to find his father and destroy UGLI's plans for world domination. And if you think it can't be done, then you don't know Beans.
Podcasts on Logan's Run, Tales of the Gold Monkey, Genesis 2, James at 15, Whiz Kids, The New Adventures of Beans Baxter, Kolchak, The Night Stalker. What else is coming to Forgotten TV? That may be up to you. Visit the Forgotten TV Amazon wish list and order the DVD set of a TV series or movie you want to see covered on Forgotten TV. Forgotten TV is not affiliated with Solo Production Company, Taft Broadcasting, NBC, Warner Brothers, or any production company involved in the making of any TV show or film mentioned in this podcast. All mentioned series and associated characters are the property of their respective copyright holders, and no infringement is intended. Audio clips are included for the purposes of review, commentary, and criticism only, and are not intended to infringe. And I'd like to thank the following YouTube channels for making some of those audio clips possible: Classic Films, Old Trailer 09, In Search Of, the Museum of Classic Chicago Television, Rob at Sea 2009, TV's Greatest, Robert Coates Returns, Wade Weiser, Videoholic 50s, 60s, 70s, Zonky Meat. Sources of quotes and background information are from the book, Science Fiction Television Series 1959 through 1989, avclub.com, republibot.com, and several online sources that are all linked in the show notes. Remember, you can directly support Forgotten TV at paypal.me/ForgottenTV. Visit forgotten.tv for all content and links. I am your host, Chris Cooling, and this has been Forgotten TV.